In this chapter, discover the tips and tricks that color professionals use to correct images. Having been a scanner operator prior to the release of the first version of Photoshop has helped me to interpret the tools and get the most out of them. In this chapter, I'm going to transfer that knowledge to you, so get ready to start reading the numbers. If creating a quality image is important to you, you want to have an idea of where the image is going to be published, whether it's going to be printed in a brochure, a large-size poster, a website, or even a game. All can produce very different results, and if you don't consider that end product, your results may range from images that are casted with a color like a pink, a green, or a red, or have an image that is reproduced dark or too light. By having the color settings set up correctly, you can be fairly close to dead on with your color correction. In this lesson, I'll discuss color correction for print and then web. Color correction for print involves a little more effort, but the results will certainly pay off. First of all, I've got an image open in front of me and it's pretty bright, and we're going to play with this in a short bit, but I want to explain something first. There's a term you'll want to use that is called gamut and something called a color gamut. And basically, all output devices have their own color gamut, whether you are printing, again, to a color desktop printer right next to you, or whether you're going to a press, a 4-color press, or whether you're going out to a large printing device that prints posters, or even if you're going out and your image is staying on the web or it's going to be used in an interactive game. There is a gamut. So you'll see here that I have a file called gamut, and this file, if you want to look at it yourself, is in the Chapter 8 folder. But you'll see that this is just a really simplified color gamut. And basically, it's showing that perhaps you take a picture and you're out at the Grand Canyon and you see this beautiful sky in these reds and browns, and you take a picture and you see all these colors. And so that's that big, wide range of color. Then you bring it back and you put it on your computer, and maybe now your computer, your monitor screen only sees the color within the yellow triangle. And then you go to print it, and then you see what's inside the blue polygon shape. So you're seeing that every time you step into another device, you're actually reducing, in this case, the gamut or the range of color that can be reproduced. Now, this is something that a lot of people don't understand, and it's best to understand the gamut that you're going to go to so that you can work and retouch your image correctly and get results that you are expecting when you're all done with the job, whether that, again, is posting your image on a website or printing a brochure. Let's say you are going to print. I've got a file here called CMYK, and it's showing ink colors. And I also have auto select on, and I have the move tool selected just so that I can move some of these colors around. And you'll see that when I have the 3 colors separated, I do have yellow, magenta, and cyan. Yellow, magenta, cyan. And these are the ink colors that are used when you go to press. You start crossing them over, and these colors reproduce actually the black in the center and the red, green, and blue. So these 3 colors are used, and they filter the light out and filter the light that bounces back to your eyes to reproduce the colors that you see when you print. Black is added because usually what you get here is a little muddy. It's not deep, rich black. So again, black is added. Now, taking that information a little further, let's say you are going to go to press. I'm going back to my color image. I am going into Edit Color Settings. No matter what your settings are here, I want you to change them to North America Pre-Press. So if you don't have a clue what you're doing, I mentioned this before, at least if you're going to print, change this to Pre-Press. And you will already see that when you press Command or Control Y, you can see a difference in the screen. Photoshop is trying to replicate the color gamut that you can expect when you go out to print. Now, let's say that you are taking this to a specific press and you know the printer and they can even provide you with information about that press. I can go down to CMYK and choose that I want to use a custom CMYK setting. In here, I can choose whether I'm going to go to Swap Standard Web Offset Press or Printing for Coded or Newsprint. I'm going to say I'm going to Newsprint because we typically print a catalog and it does go to newsprint and that does have a 30% dot gain. Now notice when I switch between these two, you can even see a difference in my image in the back, especially the reds. It's already trying to replicate this dot gain difference. And if you see something called dot gain, basically how dot gain is tested for, a 50% tint is printed, and if that 50% tint actually spreads that dot on the paper to about an 80%, that is a 30% dot gain. So it's something that you need to adjust for. And if you don't set that in Photoshop while you're working on your image, you could potentially have very dark images. Now, if you're working with a printer, there's also some other options that can be set. And if you are printing to newsprint, you might be working with somebody who is using the separation type under color removal, or if you're working with somebody on a regular offset press or even a standard web offset press, they might be using gray component replacement. Two different technologies, but basically the foundation of both is that if you understand neutrals, which you're going to understand as we go through these lessons, you know that equal amounts of CMY or equal amounts of RGB, but basically in this instance, CMYK, you have equal amounts of them, they're going to make a neutral gray anyway. So instead of having all that ink on press, why not just remove where those colors are equal and replace them with a shade of black? And again, it reduces ink and it makes a cleaner image. And depending upon the technology that your printer works, you would set this for either GCR or UCR. Black generation, I'm going to leave this at medium, but if I am going to newsprint, I bet I can't go up further than about an 85% in my black before everything just starts filling in. Total ink limit. This little number is pretty important because understand that if you have 100% of magenta and 100% cyan and 100% yellow and 100% black, that is a total of a 400% ink limit. And many presses can't handle that much ink. If you're printing a magazine and you're on a web offset press, it might even tear the paper just because you've got so much ink printing on that paper. So depending upon your press capabilities, you have a different total ink limit. And Photoshop will adjust to give you the best reproducible color based upon the setting that you put in here. So I know that we go to a press that's kind of crummy, it's newsprint, but it's for quick down and dirty jobs. I might set this for 220 and Photoshop will do its best to give me the best color, knowing that that's the maximum amount of color that I can have in a specific area. If you have a really good press that you're going to, this might be all the way up to 350. I have had printers tell me they're at a 400. It's kind of iffy, but you never know. So I can customize this, in other words, so that this is specific to the press that I go to. Going back, reviewing this. You don't know where you're going to go, use a standard setting. If you typically use the same printer, man, you can get really phenomenal results if you set this. If your printer is somebody that you work with all the time and they want to kind of lock you into working with them all the time, tell them to set up your custom CMYK. Click OK. Tell them to save it, Joe's Press. Okay. And then you can load it. And anytime you want to use it, you can either switch back to the standard web internet or back to Joe's Press, and you're ready to go. So with that understanding, I'm going to take you into just how you read values in Photoshop before we start doing some color correction. So I'm clicking OK. And there's a couple different places I want you to understand that exist. I want to go to Window, Histogram. And in the histogram, I can see data in my image. There's a little yield sign here. I'm going to click on this, and that's going to redraw the screen. Now, I have a really funky image in here. You can see a lot of spikes in here because I have some solid colors. Let me go ahead and just open up a typical image in here. I'm going to go to Bridge, and I'm going to go ahead and open up an image called Blueberry Picking. Click on the yield sign, and you can see I've got this nice smooth transition of color. And I can click and drag across this. I can even go to the panel and choose the expanded view. Now, a couple things here to understand. This is indicating that I have a lot of data in my image. And depending upon your image, whether it's something called low key, high key, mid key, you may have a different looking histogram. In other words, you might have all the data smashed to one side or another if you have an image that is a white tablecloth with white linens and white lilies, or another image that's a picture of boots in mud, might be all dark. But this image kind of spans from light to dark. This is a good histogram. It's telling me that this information has a lot of data and I can probably work with it pretty effectively. Now I'm going to go up and intentionally destroy it by going to Image Adjustments, and I'm going to choose Posterize. And I'm going to set this for 16 and click OK. And now click on my histogram. And now it's indicating that perhaps that nice gradual shade of color from one shade to another doesn't exist anymore. In fact, if I zoom in, you'll see that I actually have really chunky color now. And this is something to worry about. So when you start to work on an image, if you've been given an image, you're going to start color correcting it. It's a good idea to check out your histogram to make sure that there aren't big spikes or big gaps in it. Now this is exaggerated, but what you see when somebody color corrects incorrectly is this. I'm going to back out a little bit. I am pressing Command 0 and I am pressing Command Z. And I'm going to go to Image Adjustment Levels. Notice how when I use levels, the histogram starts to break up. Then I'll go in and I'll choose Image Adjustment Curves. Okay, and then I'll go in and I'll choose Image Adjustments Brightness and Contrast. And then I'll click on the yield sign. And just by making everyday changes, I've really chunked this up. And so if you think you've overworked an image, you probably have. And how you can tell is checking this histogram. Now I'm pressing F12 to revert this to save. And what I'm going to show you next is something really critical to understand, and that's the info panel. Now, as I move across my image, you'll see that I'm getting a reading of the color that is contained in the image underneath my cursor. So right here, I am seeing that I have a 23% cyan, 45% magenta, and 30% yellow. Or if I look in RGB, 186, 134, 138. Now, I am staying in RGB because you want to stay in RGB as long as you possibly can. If you are printing to a desktop printer, you want to stay in RGB the whole time. If you are creating an image for interactive or web, you want to stay in RGB the entire time. If you are creating something that is going to a 4-color press, you want to stay in RGB until the very end, and then you want to convert it to CMYK. So you might be reading RGB values or CMYK values, but I'm going to show you some tricks that are really going to help you understand how to color correct your image. I'm changing my Tools panel to 2-column. I'm clicking once on my foreground color, and I'm going into RGB and I'm typing in 150, 150, 150. Now I'm just pressing the tab in between, but what color does equal amounts of RGB make? Gray. And no matter what you type in here, 200, 200, 200, we've got gray. 52, 52, 52, gray. And this is key to color correction. Understanding what a neutral is, reading your values, not trusting totally what you see on your monitor, but reading those values. And that's where we're going to be going. Color correcting by numbers, which is huge. And some of you might not understand this, but I know it from experience. When we did color correction prior to computers, we had big drum scanners. We had a black and white monitor, and we totally read by number values. And I'll tell you, you start learning that way, it's not difficult. There's some easy tips and tricks to use, and you always get your color dead on. So that's where we're going to go. Get your seatbelts on. We're going to go into color correction next.